Welcome back to the Manufacturing Institute's first annual Diversity and Inclusion Summit. My name is AJ Jorgensen, and I am the Vice President of Strategic Initiatives and lead our D&I pillar at the Manufacturing Institute. Before we kick off the second half of our D&I Summit, I'd like to remind you that the chat feature is open for questions and comments, and I will be reviewing again and addressing possible live. I'd also like to thank our Conic Foundation for supporting this summit. Their support has allowed us to connect with hundreds of manufacturers in just the past few months and encourage their own D&I journeys. And now, to kick off today, let's welcome Carolyn Lee, Executive Director of the Manufacturing Institute.
Good morning. Thank you, AJ. It's great to be back here this morning, and I hope you're all ready for day 2 of our virtual D&I Summit. Again, thank you to our Conic Foundation. So now we're going to hear from some leading executives about how to lead change and embed D&I in your company's culture and how to make it part of the fabric of your organization. So I'm thrilled to be here by this distinguished group, and I will let them introduce themselves and kind of start off the conversation. But really we're here for an overview of diversity and inclusion issues facing manufacturing and the strategies and the tactics in creating those inclusive workplaces. And so I'm just thrilled, and I'm going to start off by asking Tracy to introduce herself and share with us what D&I means to you and your company to get us started in the discussion.
All right, good morning, Carolyn. Thank you for the introduction. So my name is Tracy Hustad from Conic, and I have been with the company about 29 years, although we're in a different split. We've split a couple times, and that's actually one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about what diversity and inclusion means to us, because we've had recently, as of April of this year, we had an opportunity to sort of relaunch who we are as a company, building on the values that we had before, and reframing what diversity and inclusion means to us. And so very passionate about this. I've been in HR for about half my career, maybe a little bit over that. Started in manufacturing, love manufacturing, and have a lot of passion about the diversity inclusion space, and was honored when my manager allowed me to take a bigger role in this space. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Carolyn.
Excellent. So Dawn.
Hi, I'm Dawn Jones. I am the acting CDIO at Intel Corporation. I've actually been at Intel for about 23 years. I started my career as an administrative assistant and kind of worked my way up through the company. I achieved 2 degrees. And I think for Intel, when I think about our D&I journey, we've been focused on D&I for over a decade. We've been disclosing our data in our CSR report. And then in 2015, we made a $300 million bold commitment to full representation by 2020, not only to hold ourselves accountable, but to hold the industry more accountable. We did hit that goal 2 years ahead of schedule, and we'll probably talk about later how, some of the tactics that we use to accomplish that. But I think at our core, we truly believe that diverse and inclusive teams are more creative and innovative, and it is a business imperative for us. It's a force multiplier when we talk about innovation and growth and continuing to grow our culture. And just, I would say personally, I grew up during a time watching the civil rights movement, and I always wondered if, if I was an adult during that time, if I would use my voice for something meaningful and activate. And really working in this space for me is an opportunity for me to drive change. And that is very rewarding for me as a person. So.
Wow, what a story, Dawn, and 2 very, very long careers with one company, which I think is a terrific, discussion. We talk about manufacturing and the change that we're seeing and the change that you're creating. So Stanley, over to you.
Yeah, well, very happy to be here. Stanley Porter, partner at Deloitte. Deloitte, hopefully most people know, we are a consulting audit, tax, and financial risk advisory firm. We are $40 billion worldwide, in the US plus 20 billion. And in the US, we have over 100,000 people. To say talent matters, diversity matters would be an understatement. Specifically, I started my career in industry with one of the super major oil companies, but have been in consulting and energy and industrials for over the past 30 years. At Deloitte, I serve 3 roles. I serve clients, so can bring a perspective to that, both globally and domestically. I lead our energy, resource, and industrial industry practice, and what that means is we have sectors in power, utilities, and renewables. We have sectors, clients in oil, gas, and chemicals, and then also industrial products, industrial products and construction, where the majority of our manufacturing, leadership, talent, clients, and go-to-market efforts are. And so overall diversity, when I think about it for Deloitte, I was trying to figure out how to answer this question. I see our definition evolving and growing. As it pertains to Deloitte specifically, a leader in gender initiatives, and absolutely committed to maintaining that leadership role, particularly in professional services. As I continued my career with Deloitte, we began to look at representation and diversity. Also, we struggled with, how do you involve, because we're big on culture, how do you ingrain that into the culture? And then we began to look at inclusion. When you begin to kind of add these pieces together, you begin to aggregate things. And what we've learned kind of now in, I think, this phase of our journey is you have to disaggregate, data. You have to disaggregate the issues of all the groups, that you're trying to deal with. And in this moment, as we deal with, the Black community specifically, where we are today is really this notion of equity. And we've evolved our definition, our focus, our commitment, our resources to really addressing systemic disparities and biases internally and externally. And I'm most excited about that personally, because I believe, for me, it is simply leaving the areas that I impact in a better place. And as a Black professional in what some would call an asset-intensive industry, you do want your clients, you do want your company to reflect America, where it is and where it's going. So I look forward to the conversation. The one angle that I did for Carolyn, that I'm also on the board of Deloitte, and also can provide a perspective around governance, understanding that we're a private firm, but happy to share that.
Excellent. And so, there's a common thread here, which is leading change. And Stanley, for all of our viewers today, Deloitte has been a tremendous partner to the Institute and leading our work or joining us in the work that led us to our gender initiative, our Step Women's initiative, almost 10 years ago, with the work where we realized, okay, why are women not coming and staying in the sector? And that began the STEP work. And what we've done is now expanded that, right, to many different facets. And so we appreciate your partnership and multiple perspectives you're able to bring. So, one common thread here, as I said, was passion to leading change. And we know that change doesn't happen overnight. And the passion that you all are bringing to your work and then to your companies in this work. So, Dawn, let's start with you. If you could describe either one of your D&I company's D&I initiatives or a best practice in implementing the creation of an inclusive workplace, right? So this whole summit is about how people can begin. Where do we start off? So talk a little bit about, Dawn, I know you talked about some of your CSR goals that you've published for a really long time at Intel, but talk about one of the best practices that you guys are implementing that you want to share. Oh, you're on mute.
Do I only get one? Because we have so many, but I'll try to keep it to one. I know we're on a time limit. I think that the key for us is that, D&I is part of our culture. It's how we work. It's not an initiative or a program or a campaign. Although we have all of those in that remit, it really is embedded in our culture. I think one of the key things that we're most proud of is holding ourselves accountable through our transparency with our data. It's a lot of times it's tough. A lot of times the data is not positive. And so to continue to report data, even though we are not required to, we want to continue to push that envelope because we hold ourselves accountable to not only our employees, our customers, our investors. And when we publish that data, it is another level of accountability from an industry perspective where we are able to participate in conversations like this to continue to, push the needle, if you will, on this work. I think one of the things that we are really focused on, especially going forward, I agree with everything, Stanley said about, we have to now be agile and we have to reflect society and what our customers, our customer base and our investors. And one of the things that we think is really important in this work is how we embed this into our systems. So it's not reliant on a person who may be all in and then that person leaves the workforce and the next person may not be. So what can we do that aligns this work to the systems that we have? And one of those is our inclusive hiring practices, which is modeled off the Rooney Rule in sports, which is ensuring our job recs are posted. We know that a lot of times people get the tap on the shoulder or, someone is hired into a position and we're all looking around like, I didn't see the rec. So we've done some very intentional work around making sure that the job recs are posted, making sure we have a diverse set of candidates available to interview for that job, and as well as a diverse interview panel. So I think for us, we have a lot of initiatives. We have a warm line, which we found out through the Reaching Full Representation or on our journey that we weren't able to assess when employees were interested in leaving until we were doing an exit interview. So we set up a confidential warm line, if you will, for employees to call and get counseling, coaching, talk about their skill sets or whatever that is before they leave to see if we can do a catch and save, if you will. And we've been able to, we have about an 80% save rate of saving the talent within the company because they have used this kind of confidential service. We are a part of HR. But it is truly a one-on-one kind of coach that will help you if you have a skill set mismatch or there's issues with your manager or you just want to grow in a different direction and don't have anyone to talk to. So that's been very successful for us as well.
I've never heard of that before. That's a fascinating practice. And so I'm sure many people are jotting down notes because that's a really interesting take on retention, right? How do you keep them and do that? Dawn, Tracy, what else would you want to bring? How does Arconic look at this and talk about some of the practices you're implementing as well?
Sure, thanks. And I did jot that down, warm line. So I'm going to use that, Dawn, and think about that.
Give me a call.
I mentioned that we're sort of reinvigorating as a new company. So one of our philosophies, and this is a quote from my manager, so a stumble in the right direction is better than a sure-footed silence. So I think that given everything that was going on, given everything that's going on in the community with our company, with COVID, with some other business challenges we wanted to get going and we wanted to get started, but we didn't want to wait till we had it perfect. So one of the items that we did, and like what Dawn said, it's not about a campaign. It's not about one person. We certainly have those too. And the campaign that I wanted to talk about is we launched something called Grow Together. And it was launched by our CEO. So I really appreciate his sponsorship from the very top level. And what it is a way for us to engage in activities, all employees to engage in activity. They could donate to a company that had a social justice type of background. They could volunteer with a company, which difficult during the COVID times, but certainly I think we all serve on, or we can serve on boards and some things like that. Or they could do a learning activity. And what I really liked about the learning activity is that it didn't matter where you were, right? You could be all in, or you could be just really trying to understand and learn a little bit more. And any of those actions counted towards a donation to one of our 6 ERG sponsored groups. And they received a donation, and we targeted 2,000 actions to be done by within a 3-month time frame, and we actually exceeded that within our company, and we've donated $360,000 to in total to 6 different organizations that our employee resource groups selected because it was near and dear to their mission of their organization. So it's been a really great start to our journey. I will say that it's been a great reinvigoration of some good practices that we had. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Carolyn.
Thank you. So, somebody, I think it was Mark Mayberry from Stanley Black & Decker yesterday, who said during one of the orientation discussions, you just have to get started.
Yes.
Just start. And, I think that that's an important theme. One thing that we're trying to tease out, manufacturers, we have some large manufacturers here. We have small manufacturers in our universe, right? We are of all sizes across all sectors and in all parts of the sector. And, you don't have to have the perfect I had a boss that always said, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? You don't have to start with the gold standard. You can begin, and beginning is important. And that's what this is about, is how do you begin the effort and then build, because it is an ongoing discussion, and it needs to be, to make sure that we're achieving our goals. So Stanley, you have an interesting perspective. You work with many companies, you've been in industry, you have both your own Deloitte as an employer, plus the work that you do across the sector. So in your opinion, what unique D&I challenges do manufacturers face that may be different than what other sectors face?
Sure. And so first, thank you for the recognition, the collaboration we have with the Manufacturing Institute. Paul Wellner and Heather Ashton are leading that for us. And I did want to start there because we, Carolyn, as you know, are working with the Institute on a research diversity, specifically in manufacturing. Now, that research is going to come out next year, but we're seeing, three things that come out specific for manufacturers. One is it's unique, it's different. You have to incorporate the production environment into these plans. Production environment is different than the field, different than corporate. And you have to take that nuance in place in regards to how you're going to look at your objectives. That gets into then the next 2 things, which is the employable workforce. So if you're differentiated in manufacturing, big or small, your workforce you have to look at, particularly now after COVID, but you have to look at your workforce in regards to the employable workforce that might have a local nature versus some dispersion of other industries or professions. And then finally, in the production environment, there is a unique aspect, particularly if it's trade or tech skills, of getting deep into the pipeline, starting in the pipeline, deep in the pipeline, in middle school. Again, back to the local and employable workforce. But these are, I would say, these are trends coming out of the research. But if I step back, the challenge is our current environment. Call it Industry 4.0, call it digitization. We've done the work on skills gap, Caroline. What we're seeing is, if we don't act, we're going to have a bigger issue. because the technology, automation, analytics, these things that are coming into the shop floor, these things that are transforming us in an efficient way, these things that are making us competitive, creates an opportunity to look at your workforce differently, but if not addressed, is going to increase the gap not only on the skills gap, but on this topic of a competitive workforce that is diverse. So overall, I think from manufacturing, I would focus on the workforce that's different, getting deeper into the pipeline, but being very mindful of leveraging the opportunity of this disruption in technology to bring in new talent that absolutely can be diverse and qualified.
So it all comes back to the skills gap, and to give everybody the point that, as I always talk about the skills gap study that we've done long time now with Deloitte as the landmark work of the study is the landmark study on the skills gap in the sector, but it's also the thing that people know the Institute best for. And the data point that we use, I think daily, is that it is by 2028 we'll have 4.6 million jobs that will need to be filled in the sector, and of those 2.4 million could go unfilled because we don't have the people with the skills. So how does that come back into this discussion of D&I? Well, we need to close the racial inequities and the gaps that we have in our society because it is the right thing to do. It is also the economic imperative for our sector. We need more people, and that workforce of the future is going to look different than the workforce of today. Manufacturing is older, more male, and more white than other sectors, but the workforce of the future, the workforce, in next year is different than the workforce of 5 years ago. And that was why we embedded the long-term goal, in the pledge for action, which I know we talked about a bunch yesterday. Our goal here is 50,000 tangible actions. By 2025, manufacturers would make 50,000 tangible actions, creating 300,000 opportunities, pathways to opportunities for Black people and people of color in the sector. The kicker on this whole thing is, how do we track that? In addition to people self-reporting their actions and the opportunities, by 2030, we want the sector to be on parity with the overall U.S. labor force. And we can track that through BLS data. And so, it all comes together because we need all those steps. Well, some entities, Stanley, as you talk about, we need to start in middle school and elementary school, right? That's why things like Manufacturing Day and STEM outreach and STEM career awareness matter. But some sectors, they're focused, more near-term, apprenticeship and internship. We've got to grow the pipeline the same time that we're developing those folks here today. And so all of these things are important, but this is long-term work. Tracy, you've been with Arconic a long time. You guys have changed forms as a company. You've had multiple roles. You mentioned that at the get-go. In your view, what other challenges are top of mind as you look at a dynamic and work environment, a dynamic industry sector, that makes it different on how you approach D&I for Arconic than other sector of the economy?
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. And I couldn't agree more with what Stanley said. I unfortunately don't have the same, Arconic doesn't quite have the same recognition that Intel and Deloitte have. So we have to do a little bit more work to even explain what we do sometimes in the manufacturing sector. So I think that's part of the challenge for manufacturing is not everybody knows what it is. Not everybody thinks it's the cool job to have. It's not maybe one of those jobs that you learn about when you're in grade school or in middle school. So couldn't agree more that we have to start earlier on, expose some folks to what manufacturing is about. And I know with the YWCA, which I'm a board member of, we've done activities where we try to introduce young children to how does this, what's gravity about? What is momentum about? And just trying to get people interested in some of the STEM type of activities from early on to help them understand that they can, this is something that they can do in the future and really learn about. So I'm not sure if I answered your question or not, but I think that's some of the challenges, just really making sure people do know that there's really good opportunities out in manufacturing, and then getting to being willing to explore what that opportunity is about at a company that might not have some of the name recognition of some of the big companies that we're talking to.
Well, Arconic's been a tremendous partner for the Institute as well. And so much of what we do, you guys have supported and been part of. And really, when we talk about the skills gap, we got the tip of the spear on closing the skills gap is changing the perception of our sector, right? It is not the dirty, dark, and dangerous. It is, I have young kids and I tell them daily that everything is manufacturing unless you go out and pick the apple off the tree. It's manufactured, right? And so my kids walk around and they're like, that's manufacturing and that's manufacturing, because I have instilled that in them, as my father did with me. And we know that if you're from manufacturing, you're twice as likely to get a job in the sector. But for everybody else, they don't know we're here. Now, Dawn, Intel, you are a manufacturer. You're also a tech company. I love when I talk to students, they say, oh, that's different. Like, tech is a totally different thing. It is not actually of manufacturing. But I always point out, how do you think you get that there, right? I hold up my phone or my device and I say, where does this come from? It is manufactured. So, you mentioned at the onset, and I really wanted to come back to this, your publishing of your data, right? So how, I think that's probably core to how you measure your effectiveness of your activities, but talk a little bit about that transparency for a minute, please.
Okay, I wanted to comment to Stanley's comment around the manufacturing piece, because especially for companies starting out, I think it's important to understand when we talk about inclusion and you are creating those programs or initiatives under D+I to ensure that you're programming for various shift workers. And so usually the ERG sits in, an 8 to 5 Monday through Friday. But what about those workers that are down in your factories and production plants? Are you creating ERGs or extending that employee resource group so they also feel included into that, overall effort that the company is driving? Number 2 is don't count out community colleges. I think as we talk about this work and we talk about the changing of the workforce and the workforce of the future, community colleges is a great place to secure talent for some of our manufacturing and tech that we have, especially from a entry-level perspective. So if you are starting out on this journey and you're looking at opportunities that middle school may not be for you at this time, you're looking to secure talent more immediately, I think community colleges is a great place for you to be able to secure that talent. When we talk about data, we love data. Our premise and our motto when we started down this journey is to look at the data to identify the gaps so we can create solutions. And there's kind of 2 types of data. When we talk about representation, it really is potentially looking at a group, understanding, what the makeup of that group is. And if you have gaps and, we don't have a female on this team or a person of color, are there solutions where you can create an opportunity? When we talked about posting job requisition, so posting that job requisition and ensuring that you are assessing all of the talent that's available to help fill that gap. The other is a little bit more qualitative, and that's around the employee sensing data. So we know that when it comes to inclusion, it really is grounded in how employees feel about not only the company culture, how they feel about their work, how they feel about different programs and initiatives, and how they feel about society at large. And they're bringing their societal norms and thoughts into the workplace. So ensuring that you have data that does more of an employee sensing, so you can understand where employees are coming from and how they're feeling about, we've had an enormous amount of pressure this year between COVID and the social unrest, and, add something else, so how are employees feeling so you can continue to create solutions that help drive what you're trying to accomplish in this space. And then lastly, to your point, for us, the data, the transparency is difficult. It's difficult for a lot of people, especially when we talk about the needle moving slowly in this space. And, you create bold goals and you try to achieve those goals, and you look at the data and you're not as far as you think you should be, or the industry thinks you should be. But for us, transparency holds us accountable, not only to our employees, to our customers, to our investors, to the industry. And when we publish that data, we are in forums like this where we talk about, you may ask me, Dawn, this is what your data says. And it's not a very comfortable feeling all the time. But I think that the way the world is changing and the way this work is moving, we have to get a little bit more comfortable with being uncomfortable, because our employees are expecting it of us, our customers, our investors, and the data is the way that we, and transparency and sharing the data is the way that we, hold ourselves accountable to committing to and doing the things that we set out to do.
So many important points that you just raised. Starting at the top, community colleges, absolutely. I mean, such a tremendous source of talent. We do a ton of work with community colleges. They are core to our upcoming launch of our Creators Wanted campaign, where we're seeking to change the perception of manufacturing. But core partners, people don't realize that is where the grand majority of people get their training. And now we live in a world of lifelong learning. Most people are going to go to community colleges to get that incremental learning to continue to enhance their career. And just so many pieces there. But yeah, let's talk to that. What a year this has been. 2020 is, in some ways, it's the year that wasn't, and in some ways just massive change and upheaval in a way that we've never, I think, experienced. COVID. Wow, so much to say, the tremendous loss of life. Manufacturing is at the center of combating that, right? From the biopharma to the PPE and all of the things to make us all be able to shelter at home, the importance of toilet paper, all of these massive things that we've talked about that made really manufacturing the center of the discussion this year, at a time of just, terrific economic and social and just upheaval. At the same time, George Floyd's killing back in May shifted. I feel like in some ways the axis of the earth shifted in a way here in the U.S. that I hadn't seen in my lifetime. Dawn, you mentioned earlier growing up during civil rights, movement and seeing that play out. I think for a lot of people, this is the most activity in this space that they've seen, and this outcry for social justice. It certainly accelerated our work in the D&I space, but it's work that we've all been doing for a long time. But now I think companies are all being very deliberate in talking about this in a way and with the deliberate, but also the tangible, right? We have to not just make bold statements. We've all made statements. The statements are important, but what do you do next? And so, considering all of what is going on and this call for social justice and equality, what actions, let's talk about that for a second. What did you see? What actions did your companies take? Is it national? You're setting out a national campaign? Is it very local to your community? Tracy, you talked a little bit about your local activities for employees to engage, but what else are people doing? Are companies doing? How are you leading the way? Stanley, I just heard from Dawn and Tracy, so maybe I'll start off with you if you want to share some thoughts.
Sure. Maybe I'll. This summer was difficult. It was different. And I think it gets to Dawn's point of, you talk about difficult conversations, they finally happened. And so I can get into some specifics, but the first thing that happened that I'm most excited about and proud of is that we listened. As leaders, we got on a bunch of calls and said absolutely nothing. And we listened. And what we heard, we didn't like. But we also heard that there was this thing that we haven't really touched on, is that we have 100,000 employees, and many of them are actually trying to figure out what to do, which informed our path forward. once you begin to understand the problem, no matter how hard, no matter how ugly, you can't have a path forward. So I'll get to external, but internally, I think by listening in the moment, we're better off. What you also hear when you're listening is that you hear a group of allies. And I think that's the appropriate word. But you hear a group of people who are struggling also to, how do I listen? How do I participate? How do I help? And the most difficult question, Tracy and Don has hit it. Don has hit it significantly on transparency. What are we trying to solve for? What are we trying to solve for? Particularly leaders. I have no idea why that's so hard for leaders on this topic. But anyway, so number one, in that moment, being in the capacities that I have, both in the market, a leader, and on the board, we began to figure out that we had to disaggregate, get focus, get on a path of transparency and accountability to have a long-term game. So the second thing we did was struggle, pause, to make sure that when we put commitments out, we will be able to live up to those commitments. And I'm very proud of both our CEO and chair, Joe Ugazaga and Janet Foudy, who actually took the time and took this on, because I don't believe you can delegate this topic, Carolyn. I mean, and I know you want some personal stories, but my personal pet peeve is you just can't delegate this. And so we, in the moment, we stood up a Black Action Council that is really focused in now on what are we trying to solve for now that we understand what we've heard, particularly around the Black community. And it gets to a lot of things around accountability, deployment, promotion, pipeline and talent, and also commitments externally to where up to, with matching and all, up to $10 million that we will make into organizations that are around social justice. Finally, we're engaged with our clients. We're a consulting firm, an advisory firm. We help our clients, but we also help our clients and we help our brand. Just to get to the net of this is a competitive issue. If Deloitte does not show up reflecting our clients' diversity and intentions diversity, we lose. So, I will close also by saying, we are intentionally ensuring that as leaders, we go to market as we want to be perceived and as our clients demand in a diverse way.
So tremendous, so many points there. We talked before we started and said we really want this to be a conversation, and I kind of forgot for a moment that there's an audience out there listening, but I'm glad they are, because there's so much content and value here. So all of you have mentioned CEO, and I do want Dawn and Tracy to talk about your company's actions and what you all have done. But one you've all mentioned CEO leadership. Stanley, I think you made a really great point. You can't delegate this, right? You can't delegate culture, and it's really got to be owned. That is one of the key parts of this panel. So I'd love to hear more about that too. Obviously, we have to have embedded activity among the workforce as well. It can't be just pushed down from the top. You've got to grow it from the bottom at the same time. But the leadership matters and having those conversations. So I just want to underscore that for a moment in case we can come back to it. But Dawn, what else? What specific actions have you all taken in addition to your long history in this space? What else would you like to highlight?
So very similar to Deloitte, we listened, and it was our CEO and CEO staff who held a lot of the listening sessions. We had listening sessions with the African American employees specifically, but then we found just people who are now woke, if you will, and want to do something differently and want to make a change and want to be educated. And Google is a beautiful thing for education. So, one of the things that we kind of continue to encourage people to do is, if you have an interest in something, continue to go and do some research on it so you can help be part of the solution. I think this recent environment over the last year has also given us an opportunity to look at our global employee base, because the US is not the only place that has social equity and social justice issues. And so our social justice and social equity work has taken on more of a global engagement and what we're looking for. We have a new policy person that is specifically focused on policy around, economic empowerment, growth, social equity, social justice. We've created a team within D+I that specifically focuses on the equity piece. Our Black Leadership Council and our Network of Intel African Americans group has done an amazing job creating kind of like the task force that Stanley spoke about, just underscoring maybe some of the issues that they are facing internally. And when we start to look at demographic data and how we solve solutions for each of those, our African American community has some very specific needs that we're focusing on over the next year and a half to ensure that retention, progression, hiring are all solid in that space. And I think, this is unfortunately probably the pace of change that we're going to have to deal with over the next couple of years, and the ability to be flexible and agile and create solutions that may or may not work, fail fast and pivot. I do want to touch on the executive buy-in. It's more than executive buy-in. It has to be executive buy-in, role modeling, and engagement. We've moved beyond just, I agree with this and someone else should go do it. And, our CEO created a very bold statement that he drove saying, we can no longer stand on the sidelines. This is not we have to get in there and do something differently. And I think that, opportunities will continue to crop up, and it is how we handle them, not only as an organization, but as an industry around driving true change is where the sweet spot is, I think, for us.
Great point. And I did see that statement coming out from your CEO, and that's important. And I hope that all of the outpouring in the last several months has actually, I'm actually optimistic, right? That this isn't I did it, now we'll put it on the back burner, but that this is a long-term commitment, and that companies see that this is the moral imperative, long overdue, but also the economic imperative, and that this is a front burner, issue, and it's going to be. And so actually going to that, Tracy, I know you talked a little bit earlier about some of the new work you're doing and the tremendous donation, right, that from Employee Action, which had to be really fulfilling for all your ERGs. But talk for a minute, going to that long term, can you talk for a minute about some of the trends that you expect to see over the next horizon, 5-10 years out? What do you see? How does this issue play, and how does this work continue into the future?
Yeah, thanks. I think the words agile, flexible, nimble, pivot, all those words are really key in this space. If you look at some of the trends, right, the demographic trends, for example, the Census Bureau says that by 2044, the majority will be the minority, right? There will no longer be a minority or a majority where more than 50% of the population in the U.S. is of one single race or ethnicity. So we talked about the skills gap, we've talked about just the ability to include everyone, right? That's where we have to get to, because if we can't get to that, we're not going to have people to employ, right? Somebody talked yesterday about representation without inclusion is like a bucket with a hole in the bottom, right? You fill it up and it just drains out the bottom because, without inclusion, people don't stay. And I think that's true of no matter what background you come from, right? No matter any of the 6 dimensions, plus a lot of the other diversity dimensions, people won't stay if they don't feel included, if they don't feel respected for what they bring to the party. And it's not about assimilating into a company culture. It's about being appreciated for the differences that you can bring to the company culture and the very skill sets that you add. So I absolutely think we need to be nimble, keep watching, keep being willing to change. I was thinking about this example of the don't ask, don't tell that came up, and some people would have thought, hey, well, that was a move in the right direction, right? At least folks can be in the military, they just can't talk about that, and you can't ask them about it. And at some point, people thought, well, maybe that's a move in the right direction. And then later to have that overturned because it really isn't inclusive, right? You're asking people to hide a certain aspect of who they are and what they're doing. So then later, right, President Obama overturns that, and that's another move in the right direction. So the be willing to pivot and be agile and all of that, I think we're going to have to just really embrace that as I think about the trends that are coming up for us.
So yeah, that's a great, kind of case study, if you will. We're a sector of innovation. We're a sector of creation, right? We are solving problems, whether it is, the daily or the, putting somebody in Mars, right? All of that is part of manufacturing at large, which I think is part of what's so exciting to be part of the sector. So, having people come in with new ideas and different perspectives and how are you framing your entire experience, right? And all that you bring to the table, right? That just makes so much sense. And I think I'm excited about the chance that this is the direction that we're all headed. I think you've all hit on the point that inclusion, right? There's two sides of the equation: diversity, almost a counting exercise; inclusion, how do you feel? How does your employees feel? I hear constantly from manufacturers about retention concerns, right? And inclusion is such a key part of that retention. So I know we're getting near time. I'm getting some alerts from the production team here. So, kind of a lightning round. I'll give you a choice. What advice do you have for executives on improving their own diversity and culture of inclusion? Or, how do you lead by example when it comes to diversity? And again, Stanley, I'm gonna start with you on that one. And you can have, it's buyer's choice. Which one of those two do you want to wrap up with?
Okay. Well, first, let me take, because we were going to talk about scale.
Yes.
You can't scale if you're constrained, and I think you're constrained if you don't understand and recognize systemic bias, systemic racism, things that happen in the systems that we create. Not that we create them intentionally to be biased, but if you don't actually look at your performance system, your deployment system, your rating system, and you don't understand how how bias can get into it, you can't scale, right? Which gets into your attrition. So number one, not that people might be biased, but we need to embrace that systemic racism is there. The last one that I will touch on is the gap. The notion, and anyone ever saying, which annoys me the most, that there's not enough of, is annoying. Because if you believe that, you start with failure. Versus we have an opportunity for many, and then how do we provide that? And kind of then begin to look at, which I keep coming back to, which Tracy closed on, the America, the economy, the clients that will be diverse. I take that position that, there's plenty, but there's plenty of work to do to look like our clients and society and the global economy that would be in front of us. So thank you, Carol.
Thank you. We could do this all day and keep this conversation going, but Dawn.
I read an article yesterday by Barbara Y on LinkedIn, so go check it out. And I think, she had some great points there. The main one for me is be the change. Just take a step, whether it is if all the step is assessing your data, go in and do that exercise. Or, whatever that step is for you and your company at this time, create an action with a metric and just be the change. There is a personal accountability that happens in this space that you can't put on a company or a group or a team. What is your personal accountability? Make a commitment and do a action to be the change in this space, because it is those incremental actions is what brings about real change.
Fantastic, Dawn. So well said. And I will go look for that LinkedIn. And that's, Stanley, you said it before, right? Have a conversation. Start, you can just listen. That's what, you don't have to have an elaborate, multi-year, millions of dollars, program. That is important too, and we love that leaders are doing that. But you could just start with the conversation, but that's such an important point, Dawn. Be the change and start it. So Tracy, last word goes to you.
All right, thank you. Just couple words, right? Be authentic. That's really important. I've had I can't count the number of difficult conversations this year. Those are so important. I think they're called crucial conversations, right? So being authentic. And then the second one is really to be open. We all have room to grow in this area, regardless of what it is. And I think we can all be allies and try to get your data from different sources, right? So if you always go to the same source, you're probably gonna learn the same things that maybe you already know. So be authentic, be open, and use a variety of sources.
Well, that is tremendous. And that's what we're seeking to do and to lend to the sector, the network of practitioners to be able to learn from one another. I've learned from all of you. I know I saw some note jotting on the wider screen here behind the scenes. So I think hopefully you've all learned from each other. Thank you so much for the time and the leadership and the passion and the commitment to this important work. We are thrilled to be able to be associated with each of you and each of your companies. And with that, thank you. And I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague, AJ Jorgensen, who's moderating our next panel on building D&I into team and individual goals. I think it's a perfect continuation from this discussion. So thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. That was an amazing panel, and thank you to all of our panelists for sharing their insights. I've learned a lot in this last hour. Goals are important to workplaces. They give employees something to work towards, but inclusion can't be measured in the way that production or sales or revenues are. So now we're going to hear from 3 leading manufacturers on how they have embedded and measured D&I goals for their employees, and how other manufacturers can implement these practices in their own facilities. I am excited to be joined today by 3 amazing D&I leaders, Ray Dempsey, Michelle Murphy, and Alita Richards. So we are going to jump right into our panel, and we're going to talk about goals when it comes to D&I. So let's start with Ray. Can you give us a brief introduction of yourself, where you work, and what your company is doing with D&I today?
Sure, AJ, thanks for having me as part of this conversation. My name is Ray Dempsey. I lead diversity and inclusion for BP in the Americas. I've been doing that for just about 3.5 years. It's been a great adventure at the end of my 30 years in our company. We have really made some real important choices in the last few years about diversity and inclusion. And I guess what I'll point out specifically in this introduction is just how we've been determined to move from a culture of what I call good intentions about diversity and inclusion to a culture of real, genuine accountability, just as in all the other areas of important business priority. So looking forward to talking more about that.
Perfect. Michelle, you want to give us your introduction?
Sure. Thank you, AJ. I'm very happy to be here with you all today. I'm Michelle Murphy. I lead diversity and inclusion and talent management for Train Technologies. Train Technologies is a climate innovator. We actually debuted March 2nd of this year. We were formerly Ingersoll Rand, and we spun off our industrial businesses, and they joined Gardner Denver to become the new Ingersoll Rand, and we became Train Technologies. From a diversity and inclusion perspective, I think we, similar to Ray, we've had really good intention for quite some time. And over the past few years have really tried to turn those intentions into actions by making really bold commitments like signing on for Paradigm for Parity and the CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion, and doing a lot more activity around driving both diverse representation and a feeling of inclusiveness within the company. So excited to join the conversation today, AJ. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. And Alita, why don't you give us your introduction and who you work for?
Hi, I'm Alita Richards, and I work for Covestro, LLC. We're a part of Bayer, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with Bayer aspirin, and also Bayer crop products. We were the chemical arm, so we provide polyurethane foam chemistry, coatings and adhesives, of which group I'm responsible for, in addition to plastics. So we provide the raw materials that we sell to other folks that make the things that are probably all of you have around you right now. For us, it needs to be a part of the culture. Diversity inclusion needs to be a part of everything you do day to day. And we've done a great job of incorporating safety into how we live and breathe, and continuous improvement as to how we live and breathe. And so now we have been focusing on, over the last few years, how we truly embrace this concept of making sure that everyone feels included. And so that's kind of the journey that we're on now, is to talking about it, getting consensus that's important, aligning that it's the right thing to do. And now, how do we know that we are making changes in the organization?
That is the perfect segue. How do we know we are making changes? So diving into the question. So since May, we have seen numerous CEOs pledge to prioritize D&I. They're talking about unconscious bias, engaging in courageous or crucial conversations. But why do you think that setting a top line goal is so important for a company? Alita, I'll start with you, but anybody feel free to jump in.
Sure. This is a discussion we're having right now, right? Each one of the businesses at this point in time has been setting up our own individual responsibilities for each one of those businesses that I refer to. And so now we're discussing establishing what that top line should look like. What should all of us be doing across all of the business and corporate functions, production, and everywhere else, to make sure that these are agreed upon metrics. I think the reason why that's important is it sets the tone. It sets the tone that it is important. It is something that senior individuals in the organization, including our president, and CEO here within the United States, also believes is important as to why they want to set their own goals and objectives. And so I think it requires probably movement from both kind of that groundswell, in addition to setting those overarching objectives, so everyone understands and appreciates that it's important. It's something that needs to be done.
And Michelle, so Michelle's with Train Technologies, and they're actually the chair of the NAM board. And I know that Mike Lamock actually felt personally that setting a top line pledge and engaging the NAM pledge for action, actually. Why do you think he felt that was so important to have that come from the top?
Multiple reasons. And I think starting first with the importance that we have placed on increasing the diverse representation within the company in an effort to make a more inclusive environment. And from a much broader sustainability effort, which really is, we think of ourselves now in the Train Technologies company as a sustainability company. And So part of our sustainability goals, and we've set quite bold 2030 goals around sustainability, both environmental and social. And on the social side, what we're really trying to do is promote opportunity for all. So we want not only within the company and how our employees feel, but also in those communities where we live, work, and serve. We want our employee base to be reflective of those communities. We also want to be doing good in those communities and creating opportunity for people there to have livable wage jobs and economic mobility that allows them to prosper. And so we feel like we think about it as a responsibility as a company to help do that in those places where we are. And so I think for us, it starts there. You know, also, as you mentioned, Mike Lamock is our CEO and the president of NAM, board president. He's been personally very engaged in our diversity and inclusion journey. He actually started it 10 years ago when he became CEO. It was one of the most important things to him was to diversify our workforce and really create a culture where people felt like they belonged and could bring their best self every day. And he's been on that and has not wavered from that vision since he stepped into that role. And so with that unwavering support, we've been able to really drive a lot of change. And that's what, in many cases, that's really what this is about. We're driving large scale change across companies and across communities, and with the intent that across the world, and really creating that positive impact.
So that's perfect, and I know how committed he is. When we started this summit yesterday, I read a statistic from our NAM report, or our Institute report, from 2018, which is that while 87% of CEOs think D&I is a top line priority, only 33% have a dedicated diversity person. And Ray, I'm going to direct this to you because you are a CDO. So how do you engage? I mean, all three of you come from very progressive companies who are engaged in D&I, but how do you talk about the importance of having someone at an executive level that is there for goal setting and engagement of specifically diversity and inclusion?
AJ, I'm glad you asked that because I was thinking about what Michelle just said and the idea of responsibility and the alignment to other business priorities. And what I have in my head about this really ties perfectly to that point. Having a dedicated leader, making this a top line priority demonstrates that making progress in diversity and inclusion is not just a good thing to do and not just the right thing to do. It really is a business imperative. It underpins our ability to perform, to compete, and to do well as an enterprise. And I think when you understand that from the commitment and the drive from the very top of the company, the CEO, and indeed even the board of directors, I think that's where you start to make it clear to your organization and to your people that it's not just an initiative. It's not just a phase. It is meant to become the way that we will do work, the way that we'll think about people and processes, and ultimately in service of underpinning the performance of the business.
Okay, so let me ask a question. When we talk about goal setting, we first talk about intent, right? What is, and this is a question that has come up many times over the past, since May, let's just be very honest, since May, we have been asked, what is the intent of setting a goal for racial diversity rather than a broad diversity goal? Or is it your opinions that we should have broader diversity goals and not focus on specific dimensions?
AJ, I'll jump into that and I'll say yes and yes. So we did launch what we call a framework for action just in August of this year. So it was not an immediate knee-jerk reaction to the events in late May. And we did have a series of what we called listening lounges in June, where we heard some really powerful stories from colleagues around the country and indeed in places around the world. And that prompted us to decide that we needed to take some time to be very clear about where we are and what gaps we had to close, and that resulted in this framework for action. It's 11 specific points, and it goes well beyond just representation. It does call for specific things like doubling the number of African American group leaders, our most senior executives, but it also calls for us to double our spend with diverse suppliers. We took a really, what felt like a bold step, and said that we would prohibit the Confederate flag and other symbols of hate from all BP locations around the country. And those things have really started to make an enormous impact in the way people think about our commitment in BP. I think the thing about metrics, though, is almost all companies will have a statement on their website that says, we want to be a company that gets the very best of all of our employees. And I really do like those words, but after that, I usually start to say blah, 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 because the words are all the same. And what I think companies are appreciating now is we've got to be clear about what it really means. Where are we now? Where do we really want to be, and how will we measure that progress? And that's why the elements in our framework for action matter so much.
Leader Michelle, anything to add there?
I'll jump in. Absolutely agree with Ray. I think that it's a fine line. If you are truly professing that you want a culture that is inclusive, when you really highlight one particular group within that culture, in a way it starts to be non-inclusive, because now you're focused on one. That being said, there are groups within a culture that, because of racial inequality, just a glass ceiling for females, particularly in the chemical industry, you do need to set up some metrics or targets to make sure that for those who are underrepresented, or for those who really don't have that many seats at the table, that you also start to change that within the culture. But that needs to be a part of a holistic diversity program. If you start a diversity program and you only want to focus on female executives, or increasing the number of females in your company, your diversity and inclusion program will then just have a focus on females and trying to get females as executives in the company. One of the things that we just finished with our country council, a review of our demographic information, who's being promoted, who's moving, how are we keeping diverse groups in the organization. But that has to be a part of a more holistic picture. Because if the first thing that I, as someone who's not in that group, starts to ask is if this really is an inclusive environment, and if this really is a program for everyone, why are we only focused on that individual or those groups? And so I think, don't put your hand in the sand, right? I think some people also start an entirely holistic diversity program, because really that's easy, because then everybody feels included. But you also have to pull back the covers and really figure out if you do have areas, or where you do have areas that you need focus, and do that at the same time that you're starting that comprehensive diversity program.
Michelle?
Maybe just one add. I think for us, and agree with everything that's been said, I think for us, as we were looking at what it was going to take to really create a culture that was truly inclusive, we let the data tell the story and drive our decisions. And it became, because that was what it was grounded in, it's just math. So like, and in an engineering based company, where logic always prevails, it was easy for us to talk about it that way too, and explain, this is what representation looks like around the world, and specifically in the United States. And here's what it looks like within the company. And there's a couple places where it's really not aligned. And we know, the research, and this research has been out there forever, and we seem to keep doing the research to continue proving that it's true. But we know that diversity, and you can cite many different sources, but we know that is how it works. And so making that case hasn't been all that hard. I'm not saying that everybody gets it and that it's easy. I don't mean it that way at all. but you can make the case pretty clearly and quickly. You also just really have to know your data for the internal numbers and understand what that means and know what your change levers are.
So based on all of your answers, I think I probably know the answer to this, but let me ask anyway. Who sets your company's goals? Is it hierarchical or is it collaborative? Especially if you're using data, how is it coming up from the bottom, or is there a group? Is it cross-functional? What's the actual process for setting the goals?
If I could jump in, because we're in the process of doing that right now. Last year, each one of the businesses, so each one of the senior VPs for each one of the businesses thought about what they wanted to set up as objectives, targets, how they measure the results, the whole gambit for what would happen within those businesses, in addition to our supply chain head and all the other corporate functions. This year, we're all taking a look at the objectives we set for 2019 and 2020, and we're figuring out how we want to revise those for 2021. While that is going on within the leadership teams and within those groups, our president is also looking at, and to Ray's point, our head of D&I for the organization, because I also believe that's important position. They are looking at all of the objectives that are now kind of flowing from, the American Chemistry Council and all of the other industries that we're a part of, and looking at those holistic objectives, then reviewing the objectives that we have within the teams, and then also at one of our next country council meetings, figuring out what are going to be those high-level overarching objectives that tie in the objectives that kind of presented themselves from each business, who really would have some slightly different objectives that they need to look at. That taken into consideration those trends and the industry objectives that have been identified, given all that's happened in 2020, right? And then what we want to do as Covestro. And so for 2021, we'll have overarching objectives that tie in externally and internally. We will have business group or even functional objectives. And so it's a combination of everything you just said. It's collaborative, it's top down, it's out in, it's in out, trying to really define the best set of objectives that we could find for the whole organization.
Okay, so I'm going to get a little bit more tactical because we're starting to get questions, but what kind of metrics are you looking at when you determine what goals you're setting? Are you looking at employee surveys, retention data, hiring data? Are you prioritizing certain metrics over others?
I can maybe get us started. We like data, so we look at all types. So from our annual engagement survey to how we look at different pulse surveys that happen across the organization on a number of topics, as well as our demographic data, as well as the trends that we see happening kind of in, just in the future of work, if you will. And so we're looking at a lot of pieces. We know, or what we believe to be true, is there are really three components that kind of make up what your representation looks like. And so we feel like we've gotten that pretty clear. You obviously have hiring, you have promotions and pulling people through the pipeline within the company, and you have retention on, just simply, are you keeping people? I think for us, what we've started to spend, maybe shift a bit of our energy to, is what does onboarding look like, and how are we engaging people so that when we're hiring diverse employees, how does it feel once you're here? And I think that's been maybe a little extra hard in the COVID world because it's just a little bit more isolating. But that the inclusion metrics, I believe, equally as important as I would say debating how best to measure inclusion. And we have some really good ways to do it through employee survey, But I think there's probably more and other ways we could do that too. So interested in hearing if others have some really good ways to do that. For setting the metrics, for us, it has been on the representation side, looking at data, looking at the what does the gender representation look like around the world? Therefore, that's what ours should be. We believe that it should be at parity, 50-50. On the race and ethnicity side within the United States, we're looking at the racial and ethnic representation within the country and saying that our employee base should match what is available in the labor pool in the country. And that's how we have looked at setting our goals.
Ray, can I assume VP is doing the same for metric setting and data collecting?
We are, just like with Ada and Michelle, we're an engineering-based company. We love data. And what I've really pushed us to do over the last several years is to really go a bit deeper, even in those three areas that Michelle just outlined, in the hiring, the development and promotion, and then the retention. Let's do a bit more analysis to understand some of the reasons why we get what we get in those areas. So on hiring, we've said we want to hire a diverse workforce, and we keep going to the same schools we've always gone to and hope for different results. So we started to examine, what really are the outcomes and what choices do we need to make to aim us in a place where we achieve greater results, whether that's about gender or ethnicity. In development and progression, we've been examining details like performance rating outcome. Every year we go through a performance management exercise, and performance ratings are a big factor in the way that people are selected for development opportunities and ultimately promotion. So we need to make sure we understand that the way that is working is equitable and fair and gives everybody a fair shot. And then even on retention, we certainly want to know why people leave, and we have to explore exactly what the trends are, and we try to break that down by subgroup. We started to look carefully at this index called the Leadership Parity Index. It's essentially an illustration of the glass ceiling. It looks at the proportion of any particular group in leadership levels as compared to the proportion of that same group in what we call our professional staffs. And if people really are being pulled through in a consistent way, then every group should be at a 1.0 on that index. And when we see differences, it's a signal that there's some things that we need to explore more carefully. So I agree completely with the way Michelle outlined it. And my challenge is to look underneath those headlines and make sure you have an appreciation of what's driving those performances.
Okay, so let's chat about diversity versus inclusion. One, diversity is measured, right, in hard data. You can look at it, you can do the math, right? The other's a little bit harder to get those performance indicators for. So what best practices are you utilizing to measure the inclusion of your company? Well, I'll jump to you because I see you now.
No, similar to Michelle, we used to do an annual employee survey. And then we would take, and I'll just speak for our company, a few months to analyze and look at all the data. We've adjusted it now so that it's once a quarter, and it's only 10 minutes. I mean, it's a very short survey. And so throughout the year, we can really gauge customer engagement. We're able to figure out if there are pockets or changes or shifts within the year, which gets into, I feel a part of the team. I would recommend this organization to someone else. All of those indicators to tell you if someone either is engaged with their work and also feels included within the organization. And so I think that has been helpful, because to your point, the inclusion part is, for the lack of a better way of saying it, the warm and fuzzy, it's the gray, right? It's there aren't a lot of specific facts and details around that. It could be survey, it could be more anecdotal. One of the things that we do from an anecdotal perspective is, at least once a month, I set up informal, randomly selected groups of folks. And for about 45 minutes, we just sit and talk. What questions do you have? What concerns do you have? And I think that with inclusion, there has to be some level of engagement. It can't just be, and all of us do it. And we just finished our salary survey, our equity around salary surveys. If I'm a Black female and I'm a chemist at this level with these number of years, do I have the same kind of relative salary as other folks in the organization? Those are kind of data-driven analyses that can be done. Inclusion is much more around feeling thought, and I think a survey helps. And one of the things that we found was that, and I'll just say, it just took us a long time to analyze that data. That by the time you got finished analyzing the data, you're about 4 months in. And so 3 other things might have happened in the organization. And I think these really short-term surveys give us a quick pulse check. And I know there are different ways to do it, but that's the way we found over the last year, just to quickly settle the survey and find out how folks are feeling about working in the organization, their colleagues, their supervisor, and then really dedicated to quickly looking at that data, making some quick review points, and then figuring out if there's things that we need to do over the coming months to adjust or to change, or to celebrate if something's going very well.
Positive note there. Ray, I know you said you guys were doing listening lounges. Is that something that you guys plan to continue to do, or is that something when we face new crises, as we do all the time, that you'll implement on an ad hoc basis?
Yeah, it fits within our description of activity that I just heard a lady use, which is engagement. We've been really intentional about creating conversations around various issues in the D&I landscape. The listening lounges we launched specifically in reaction to the tragic killing, the murder of George Floyd. And the response was overwhelming. We had a few of them. We expected a few hundred people. We ultimately touched thousands of people, not just around the US, but in the UK and in Europe and Latin America and Asia. It was pretty broad. So our intent is not necessarily to continue to do those specific kinds of events at that kind of a scale, but to continue to create those opportunities for people to talk. Later this week, I'll do a webcast with a couple of colleagues to talk about our progress in the course of this year and the progress against the framework that we launched and our plans for 2021. So that engagement element is a really big part of the way that we try to drive the agenda.
So with COVID, we've also seen women leaving the workforce in droves. Is this something that when new demographic and diversity issues arise, how do you continue to change your goals as needed, and make sure that people are still included? As so many of us are remote, and then you have half of your workforce still production on the floor. How do you manage the inclusion in those aspects and at that time?
I don't know that I necessarily have an answer. I maybe have some thoughts. And I think what we have tried to do, really driven by the 2 pandemics we have happening at least in the country and many other countries as well, from the spring through the fall, we've really put the call to action with our managers and have asked our managers to play the role that many of them were playing already, but even to be more intentional in checking in on people's well-being, checking in on how people were feeling as part of the organization or part of the team, whether they were in a production facility where they were actually seeing them or whether they were seeing them this way, which many of us are working like this all the time now. So really trying to create I don't know that you can really recreate the same in-person feel, but creating that same type of connection, even if it is virtual, and really allowing it to be, I'll say, local or happening where the people are. That's been one thing that we've done that I think is helping us. I don't know that it works for the long term, but it certainly has been helpful in this shorter term.
Leader Ray, do you have anything to add?
I think it's been a challenge, and I could probably speak for Ray and Michelle. I think when you have those individuals who work from home, you can be more supportive and more flexible. When you have folks that are actually at a manufacturing site, it's much harder to say, okay, you can work from home, because we really need you on site. One of some of the creative things that we've done with some of the, I'll say parents who are working in the labs, who actually need to be in the lab to perform their job, is that we have identified some other projects they can work on from home. Their colleagues have stepped up and have helping to support some activity in the labs as we transition through this challenging time. And I think to your point, we've been blessed that we're in a situation that we can be flexible. And I think, Michelle, you started off by saying you don't have an answer. I don't have an answer either. At least I can appreciate and share a couple of things that we're trying to do to be as flexible and supportive for parents or for working women and for working single parents, particularly now, and how they can balance between, and we can maintain our push to be a successful business, but also to provide opportunities to include folks that are having challenges as no fault of their own right now. It's tough. It's tough. I have to say, I'm glad that part of me is glad that a number of our folks are either in the labs in Pittsburgh or can work from home. It's very challenging in a manufacturing facility to figure out how to balance that and to manage COVID exposure and everything else that needs to happen in a manufacturing site. So my hat goes off to those folks who manage our folks that are actually in the manufacturing unit.
AJ, I'll add one point. I love the way Michelle and Aleda described it, and it is really tough. But at BP, we're also in the process of reinventing our company in the midst of this pandemic and all the things going on in the world around us. We are, as we say, we're reimagining energy for people on the planet. We've set an aim to get to net zero carbon by 2050 or sooner. And those things have caused us to be even more thoughtful about the change in our workforce. We've got an entirely new executive team at the very top. And we just last week, or a couple of weeks ago, made announcements of the fourth tier of our appointments, where we're really completely reshaping the entire company from top to bottom. And we've been really intentional about gender representation. We've been really intentional about the kind of conversations we have to provide the support. And we've also signaled that we're going to continue to work in a very flexible way. It won't just be what we've done in response to COVID-19, but the future for us will be some form of a combination of some people in offices and at manufacturing sites when they need to be, and then other forms of flexibility, whether it continues to be working from home or otherwise. And I think those signals, even if it's not yet a clear solution for the longer term, it's really helped people to know that we're doing everything we can to ensure that we preserve and grow the diversity and the representation of all differences around our workforce.
It's perfect. Yeah, I don't expect anybody to have a hard answer right now, and hopefully we won't need an answer for much longer. So when we talk about diversity goals, for many, especially those that are newer to the D&I journey, they just hear who was hired. That's what diversity means to people that are less familiar. So taking a look at what other types of goals are important to set for a company. You talked about employee surveys. Do you measure things such as in number of internal trainings or blog posts or external, how they make an impact to the local community? What are the types of goals that you feel are important for your company to be aware of that aren't just the demographics, here's who got hired and here's how long they stayed?
There's a few areas I'll mention, AJ. I mentioned already that we're focused on supplier diversity. We think who we do business with matters. And so we try to preserve a sharp focus on that in the way that we talk about our progress in diversity and inclusion. We care about our partners and the community organizations we work with. And while we're not motivated to go around and collect awards, we do pay attention to where we turn up on, say, the HRC annual survey and to ensure that we are continuing to do the things and demonstrate the commitment in various dimensions of diversity that makes us an employer that people want to join. We care about the the working mother media analyses, and there's many of them. So I'll make mistakes if I start to try to call them out, but those things matter. And then ultimately, I think we do care a lot about our own communities where we have a large employee presence. We do things to try to provide support and demonstrate our commitment to being a good neighbor. And we have ways where we try to examine whether or not those things are having the impact that we desire. So it's well beyond just our workforce representation, but we try to be specific about where we know we're trying to make an impact.
If I just building on what Ray shared, I think very, very similar. We do many of those same things, and they're really good barometers for us to know where we stand relative to many of the other companies, and also help us know what areas we need to focus on or where we need to do better. And I think one of the pieces that can be difficult in this is that there are many dimensions of diversity, and not all of them have a way to be tracked or measured or even maybe indicated. And so part of why we believe the inclusion piece is so important is because there are so many dimensions of diversity and many that are invisible. And so really trying to make sure that how we're thinking about things isn't just about the number or a representation piece or the visible aspects of diversity, but truly all inclusive, really no pun intended there, on all encompassing, maybe that'd be a better way to say it, so that we're really thinking about it in a truly holistic way. And again, part of that uplifting of the communities as well. Like I think about one of the things that we just rolled out is offering every employee a day to go volunteer. And part of that, knowing that so many of us are just trying to find ways to help. We have an incredibly generous employee base to begin with, but also wanting the company to be putting something into that, saying, take time and go do something. Of course, where it's safe, when it's safe, or how it's best safe, but really making that be part of that effort to be inclusive, not only within the company, but within the communities. And it's one more way that we're trying to add another level of care, during this time. And it's something that I expect it will continue for us.
So one of the things I'm often asked is how can companies that are doing very well, the three of yours, start to share best practices so that companies and manufacturers, specifically often small manufacturers that are just starting their D&I journey, can replicate. So I want to ask each of you to describe a best practice or case study that you have implemented to create a more inclusive workplace, and how are you measuring the effectiveness of that best practice? Alita, I will start with you.
So I'll answer it this way, and I'm trying and was thinking of an example that I think anybody could implement. I don't know how many folks are familiar with strength finders. It's kind of like Myers-Briggs, but it's a little more intense with the number of different variables for each individual. And last year we tried to find something that we could roll out, a kind of program that goes beyond just, as Michelle put it, it kind of touches upon those facets that are not easily recognizable, that everybody could participate in. And we could start to communicate and facilitate some level of inclusion. And so we use strength finders. Everyone participated within the organization. It was amazing to see how people embrace their top 5 strength finders. We just started a communications team with some folks who identified communications as one of their strengths. People are still referring back to that. We've done some sessions and some games where you had to guess folks, your colleagues, based on their strengths and some of their activities. And I'm trying to, and I know I'm making light, I guess, of an example, but I think it doesn't have to be rocket science, and it doesn't have to be very expensive for you to start getting people to feel like they're a part of something. And so for us, for the $20 or so, or probably even less for the surveys, or for the actual tool, and have somebody to come and just to facilitate, it gave us a common thing to circle around, and a common language for us to talk about. And I think that, which then reflects in some of the surveys that we've had as people become closer and better understand their colleagues and how they fit in the organization. So I can't say specifically that the specific Strength Finder activity helped with our survey results. I think a myriad of those kind of examples are how you build that culture and that community within your organization. So that would be one that I think I can share, that really any organization can go out and kind of implement something similar to that.
I love that idea. It's a great example. And nice, because you're looking at the uniqueness that every person brings, right? Which is really powerful in sending the message and creating that culture. I guess my thoughts for people just starting out, I would say pick a few and try really hard to prioritize to the few. Pick a few things to get started and realize that what you're doing isn't a program or an initiative. It's beginning a large scale change. And so being thoughtful and prioritizing and picking those couple things that you can go do that people can see and feel is probably the place to start. And there's a lot of different things you could do for that. I'll share what we did. We started these 3 or 4 years ago, and they've been incredibly powerful for us, and they're free. It sounds a little bit like the listening lounges that Ray mentioned. We call them bridging connections. You could call them anything you wanted, but they're basically a safe space for people to come together and talk about controversial topics, or maybe not even controversial, just things that people don't know or are uncomfortable with. And so we pick a topic, and we've covered probably 10 or 12 different topics. We tend to repeat some of them just because of how powerful the discussions are. We create very few ground rules around how people participate in these, which is everyone's invited, and there's a expectation of respect in how we ask questions or share comments. But it's been a great way for us to truly bridge the connections between two very different viewpoints. And it doesn't cost anything. It takes time, and it takes a willingness to listen and demonstrate the empathy that many people need in processing through whatever they might be struggling with or wanting to share their experience with you. And what we've seen is how much people have learned through these different experiences. And, we have somewhere it seems like between 800 and 1,500 people that tend to join these. Some are, the people who are always going to come, and oftentimes it's based on the topic of who's choosing to join. But they've been great ways to share very different experiences and create a sense of belonging or community within the organization.
Right?
I think the best practice I'll share, I love the ones from Alita and Michelle, and I think a good add to that is try to be intentional about transparency. I often find that one of our biggest inhibitors to the pace of progress is that there are just lots of people with perfectly good intentions, just focused on doing their jobs every day, and they just don't know where there are gaps and what role they might have in trying to close them. So we've made a lot of progress in the last few years in the way that we share data about where we are in BP with our internal colleagues. And we've made a commitment as part of our framework for action to launch a comprehensive diversity and inclusion report in this coming spring, alongside our annual report and our sustainability report. And it's a practice that I've observed by lots of companies around the US, particularly in the tech sector, And what I say to my BP colleagues about this often is that, well, they're not bragging. It's not that their numbers are great. And in fact, I think in many ways, we'll have data that while we're not content and we're not necessarily proud, it'll stand up pretty well against the representation and other metrics that are in some of those other companies. But their commitment to transparency, their commitment to saying, this is where we are, this is what we're doing about it, and this is the progress we expect to make, I think is a really powerful part of engaging your own workforce and frankly, inviting your stakeholders, your shareholders, your neighbors to be part of the progress you'll make in your company.
That's awesome. Those are all perfect examples. So thank you all so much. I do want to ask a question that came in via our chat, our live chat, and that is about living in a rural, less diverse demographic. So when we are talking about goal setting, are you able and do you break out goals so that you have, a top line global goal, as many of you have talked about, but also knowing that if you are in a less diverse community, that goal for that specific plant might be different than it is in a more diverse community? Or do you avoid that by talking about a broader context goals?
I think that's what's important, and that's what goes back to one of your original questions about who sets the goal and where who establishes them. I do believe you need to have an overall context and an overall vision for D&I. I then also believe that each unit group has a different nuance. They have a different community. They have a different. We have some groups that have more females than they do males. And so setting an objective that we want to increase the number of females for that particular group may not be appropriate. And so I think it's a combination of identifying what your vision is, and then also soliciting that feedback and allowing some of those other teams, particularly those that could be in a rural community, to identify how you make sure you have inclusion within your organization. Because I always like to tell folks, there are always folks that feel different, regardless of where they are. It could be, as an example, a new tech trainee that's just joined our organization that's sitting in a room full of folks that have 25 years of experience. They might all be white males, but there's still a difference. And so when we talk about inclusion, I think it's important that you also figure out how you can make sure that regardless of site, location, function, the folks within that team feel like they are respected and included. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, I'm going to ask you my last question for today, and that is, what is your go-to resource for keeping up on D&I best practices and trends? If you can list a few, but where would you recommend people go?
I'll jump in. Mine's easy. Yeah. Dina Clark. Dina is our D&I head. If you don't have a Dina Clark, find a resource of that person who truly embraces it, is passionate about it, because Dina knows the latest and greatest of everything that's going on. She is counselor, coach, guru. She's my Yoda. She's everything from a D&I perspective. And I know if she were listening, and she very well be, she will laugh, but it is true. I think it is such a complicated and complex topic that it's important to have those resources that you can go to bounce ideas off. Ray, to your point, sometimes you say things or mean things, the intent might not be there, but because I don't understand all the nuance, maybe I didn't say it quite right. She's that guide, and I think it's critical to find those folks and add them to your network so that you have that resource available to you. Sorry, I get excited when I can toot Dina's horn. So
I like the Dina shout out. We all need a Dina. Okay.
I don't know if Alita would love it if I said I'm going to get myself a Dina, or not hers.
As long as it's not my Dina. As long as it's not my.
I understand. I agree with the argument there. Having subject matter expertise that both understands the external landscape, but also understands your company, your culture, your people, your leaders. I think that is really important interface to manage. We have a bunch of great external partners though, and you said one, and then you said a few, and so I'll be careful because it would really be hard to distill it down to just one. We've had a great partner in a group called Coquel, formerly called the Center for Talent Innovation, and they really convene some of the best thinkers and sort of thought champions around diversity and inclusion around the country. We do rely on the HRC, and the Human Rights Campaign has done terrific work around the LGBT plus community for a really long time, and they have shared lots of great insights. We've had members of their team come and spend time with us and with our BP Pride BRG, and that's been really meaningful. I mentioned Working Mother Media, and there are groups like them, not just them, that do annual surveys, and they help to shape the way we think about, we position ourselves as an employer. And in the instance of that particular magazine, it's with working parents, but there's actually a broader set of audiences that they work with. So there are many, and so if any group is looking for that kind of expertise, a little bit of Googling will at least get you started and point it in the right direction. But there are some great examples.
And I guess maybe just an ad. There are so many out there. If you're getting started, or if you're in it and you're looking for, the kind of the right resources, there's lots of ways to write. I just have found, for me, I like steering towards research-oriented organizations where I can really understand how they did what they did to draw the conclusions that they've drawn. And then compare that, I think, Ray, to what you were saying about understanding the external to also then understand how it translates internally, and knowing how you're going to, how ready are we for that change, or how we're thinking about leading the change. So just the research really helps me get grounded in fact, or as much fact as possible. And I have really come to appreciate that. I think one of the other practices that I've seen work really well in our company, and it actually started in some of the remote locations where they came to us and said, we really want to do something around diversity and inclusion, and we have these company-wide ERGs, but we don't have enough, take Women's Employee Network. We don't have enough women here to have our own chapter of a Women's Employee Network, but we have all these different interested parties. Can we do something different? And we said, absolutely. And so it became the foundation of something that we now know as inclusion networks. And we have several of them out across the company. And in many cases, they're in locations that aren't really large sites. They're in a lot of the smaller sites. But it's really a way for people to engage in diversity and inclusion related work and activities. And it's been a really powerful way for us to have inclusion be felt in all the different aspects or all the different parts of the company.
I love that. If you will all indulge me, there was one more question that came in from the live chat, and I want to answer every question. And that is, it's an interesting one. What are some examples of good formal training to become a strong D&I leader? Masters, certificates, workshops, etc. And this kind of ties into what are the go-to resources? Thoughts? Considerations?
Well, there are a lot of things out there. I hesitate to go to one particular source on that. I guess my take would be really understanding where you are. I think one of the most important things in being able to lead D&I efforts for a company is understanding where you are on all of these different aspects and dimensions, and being clear how your feelings or perspectives, just know where they are so you're grounded, and then know where they need to be for the company. And that self-reflection is a huge component of the learning. And so, yes, there are formal aspects of learning out there, different certificate programs, different assessments that I tend to find very helpful as part of that self-reflection and learning. But that's where I would start, is really understanding what it is I'm trying to change at this particular organization and have a specific, I don't have a specific certificate I would recommend. I really would recommend starting with that self-reflection.
Agreement from Ray and Alita?
AJ, I can add just one quick thing. I love the way Michelle just said that. I was asked this question recently, and I think what I said was almost word for word the way Michelle just described it. Sometimes, though, the challenge that people come to me with is they want to be in diversity, equity, and inclusion, but they work now in some other space, and they want to know how they can position themselves, and should they go off and get a certificate, is there a degree? And my encouragement really is to engage, to participate. There are the employee resource groups, or as we call them at BP, business resource groups. I was a member of business resource groups for a long time in my company. I was part of our diversity and inclusion council. So I had a chance to see the issues, understand some of the challenges, and understand the way decisions are made. And I think grounding your own passion, your own desire and commitment, that self-awareness Michelle described, with a real appreciation of how things get done and how you make change within your company and your culture, that's ultimately what can make you most impactful. So the certificates, the external programs, they're probably great to ground you in the literature, the research, and what other people think. But ultimately, I think the way you create impact is by connecting your own self-awareness, your commitment with an understanding of how to make change within your structure.
Perfect. Alita, anything you want to add, or? You good? Okay. Well, we are actually a minute over time, so thank you for indulging me. And I want to thank Alita and Ray and Michelle for your time and your expertise and your insights. It was immensely valuable. Next, I'm going to take just a moment here, and then I'm going to be back with everyone to wrap up the D+I Summit and look into 2021. So again, I want to thank all of our panelists for the past 2 days and our experts who have shared their expertise, their experience, their insights, their knowledge and best practices and insights have just been so valuable as we strive to make our industry and the world a more diverse and equitable place. I do want to offer a roadmap for our audience on the opportunities to engage and deepen your knowledge in D+I, especially in the manufacturing sector in 2021. So I do want to bring up some slides and talk through what we are planning to do. So the first thing that I want to bring up is the pledge for action. So as you've heard over the past 2 days now, over the summer of 2020, the NEM board leadership convened a task force on closing the opportunity gap, and they recommended some critical and overdue actions. This has resulted in a bold goal by the NAM CEO that we announced in September on behalf of the manufacturing sector. And that you can see this goal here is by 2025, manufacturers commit to taking 50,000 tangible actions to increasing equity and parity for underrepresented communities, creating 300,000 pathways to job opportunities for Black people and all people of color. And the goal is, in order to do so, we will reflect the diversity of the overall US workforce by 2030. So tangible actions can be as simple as starting a conversation about equity, holding courageous conversations or listening labs. It could be training, unconscious bias, creating D+I goals, as you heard about today. On the pathways, it could be upskilling or recruiting goals. It can be something that is as simple as working with an HBCU. The idea here is we need manufacturers to take real action. Launching an ERG, mandating unconscious bias training. If we can commit to taking actions both large and small, we will create momentum for lasting change, which will propel our industry forward and bring about a more equitable future for all persons. So we can make more than airplanes and vaccines. We can actually make a better future together. In 2021, we're also going to be thrilled to be partnering with Deloitte on a new study. So what you will see is that in February 12th, we really encourage you to participate in our peer-to-peer discussion. It's going to offer insights and key best practices and networking on D&I and talent. And that will be part of our information gathering for a brand new report coming in April 2021 on both D&I and talent and the future of work. We're also encouraged to keep offering case studies on our website. So if you actually scroll down past the, on the D&I Summit page, if you scroll down past the video, you will see a link directly to our case studies pages that include our D&I resources. I encourage you to please continue going to that page, but also to offer your own best practices and simply shoot us an email and we can set up an interview to include you and your company in those case studies. And then finally, that hashtag. So that hashtag is not going away. So please continue to use MFG Women or MFG Together, excuse me, for all of our D&I topics. We're excited to partner with Deloitte and we're excited to partner with all manufacturers to continue to gather this industry expertise and analysis and delve into best practices for manufacturers in 2021. And in continuing so, earlier this year in June, we started a D&I Roundtable series. We will continue that very successful series into 2021. You can see the upcoming dates starting on January 22nd for engaging production employees, which was a very common topic in yesterday's networking discussion, but also throughout the summit. February 19th, intersectionality and workplace flexibility in March, neuro differences on April, workplace re-entry in May, and sexual orientation in June. And we will continue to do those throughout 2021. These are just the first several months. If you go to the link that is listed here, you will be able to see where you can register and learn about all of our upcoming events past June as well. And then again, I encourage you go to what you see here is a screenshot of our resources page, which will allow you to gather more information as well. So I welcome direct feedback and requests on roundtable topics, as well as your engagement as a panelist, sharing best practices. So if you would like to do any of that, again, please just shoot me an email at inclusion@nam.org. So let's take another moment to thank all of our amazing diversity experts and manufacturing panelists for sharing their knowledge and experience with us. Thank you again to our Arconic Foundation for supporting this summit, without whom we wouldn't be here today. And as we said at the beginning of the summit, just get started. We've shared countless ways for you to do so, whether you are the CEO of a Forbes 100 or a small 50-person shop, a worker yearning to know more about a specific topic. We've offered you diversity experts to partner with and manufacturers who are sharing their stories and best practices. When we were children, we assumed we would change the world, and this is our chance. So let's just get started. Thank you for joining us today.